Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be doing something kind of different. It's going to be a deep dive into the world of immigration law,
Oh, cool.
and specifically how attorneys can build successful cases,
Okay.
especially when we're talking about those like really kind of high-level visas like the O-1, the EB-1A, and then those national interest waivers.
Yeah, those are the tough ones.
Yeah, those are the big ones,
Yeah.
right? So the source material we're looking at today is actually pretty interesting. It's an article that's written for immigration attorneys.
Oh, wow. So like for the lawyers themselves.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
And it's all about how they can, how can I say this? How they can kind of like boil down all this complicated information into like a clear and winning argument.
Makes sense. I mean,
Yeah.
immigration law is notoriously complex. I imagine even for the lawyers, it can be overwhelming sometimes.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
so the goal for us today, and for you listening,
Mhm.
it's not to turn you into an immigration lawyer, right?
Yeah.
But it's more to kind of pull back the curtain and see, okay, what are the things that make a case strong? What are those underlying principles that really help someone demonstrate that they're like, truly exceptional or that their work has that national importance?
Yeah. Give us that inside scoop.
Right, exactly. So the article jumps right in and starts with this idea, and it might seem obvious, but that immigration law is, well, really complicated.
Yeah. No surprise there.
But then it goes on to say that the real skill, the art of being a successful immigration attorney, isn't just about understanding all the rules and regulations. It's about being able to take that complexity and explain it to everyone else involved, whether that's the client or the immigration authorities.
So it's not just knowing the law, it's knowing how to communicate it clearly, right?
Exactly. And so we're not talking about like oversimplifying things or dumbing it down, but it's more about that clarity, that translation, if you will.
I like that translation, like taking this whole other language of legal terms and making it understandable,
Mm.
relatable.
Yeah, exactly. So they actually use a really good analogy in the article. They talk about it being like a translator working between two languages,
Wow.
You're not losing any of the meaning, but you're just presenting it in a way that's, well, more accessible.
Right, because if the people evaluating the case can't understand the argument, then it doesn't really matter how strong the case is legally, right?
Exactly. And that brings us to another super important point that they emphasize, and that's the power of storytelling.
Ooh, storytelling.
Okay.
I'm intrigued.
Right. They make this case that winning these kinds of immigration petitions, the O-1s, the EB-1As, the NIWs, it's not just about submitting like, a giant stack of documents and evidence.
It's got to be more than just a data dump, right?
Right. It's about crafting a compelling narrative.
Yeah.
You're essentially telling a story that showcases the applicant's journey, their accomplishments, and how they fit into this bigger picture of exceptional ability or national interest.
So, like, how does that story change depending on the specific type of petition?
That's where it gets really interesting. So, for example, take the O-1, which is for folks with extraordinary ability.
Right, like those top-tier individuals.
Yeah, and then the EB-1A, which is kind of similar, but focuses on extraordinary ability in specific fields like science, arts, business, athletics, that sort of thing.
Got it. So those are for the real standouts, the
Yeah.
rock stars in their fields.
Exactly. So for those petitions, the story needs to be like, building a highlight reel, right?
Oh, I like that, a highlight reel. Like showing off the best moments, the biggest achievement.
Exactly. But it's not just about listing them off. It's about weaving them together to show a clear trajectory of like growth and really exceptional impact in their very specific niche.
So instead of just saying publish 10 research papers, you'd maybe highlight how those papers were cited by like leading experts all over the world and maybe how they sparked new research directions in the field.
Exactly. You're painting this picture of someone who's not just competent, but like truly exceptional, influential in their field, a real game changer.
Someone who's making waves, pushing boundaries. I get it.
Right. And then for the NIW, the National Interest Waiver, which we've talked about before, the focus shifts a bit, right?
Right, because the NIW is less about like individual brilliance and more about how your work benefits the U.S. as a whole, right?
Exactly. So with the NIW, the heart of the story is all about how the clients work, whether it's research, innovations, entrepreneurial ventures, how all of that directly and measurably benefits the United States.
It's about the bigger picture, the national impact.
Exactly. The narrative needs to clearly articulate, the national importance of their endeavors. It's less about, look at all the awards I've won, and more about, here's how my work is solving this critical national challenge.
Right. So, for example, instead of just listing all the grants a researcher received, you'd want to emphasize how their research is directly contributing to, like, curing a major disease or developing a sustainable energy source, something with real tangible benefits for the country.
Exactly. It's about making that connection between their work and the greater good. Now, the article even touches on these things called requests for evidence, or RFEs, which I know can be a bit of a nightmare in the immigration
Oh,
process.
yeah, RFEs.
Mm,
Those can be stressful.
yeah,
Basically, it's when the immigration authorities come back and say, hey, we need more information to be convinced.
right. And what's interesting is the article suggests that a lot of the time these RFEs pop up because the initial case presentation didn't really convey the applicant's merits clearly enough. Like the story wasn't told effectively.
So it's not that the evidence wasn't there, but maybe it wasn't presented in a way that highlighted the significance and the impact. Like the immigration officer reviewing the case couldn't easily connect the dots.
Right. It's like if you're telling a joke and you forget the punchline, all the setup is there, but it falls flat without that final element that ties it all together.
It's about anticipating what the reviewer might need to be convinced, and then proactively addressing those points.
Exactly. A well-constructed narrative not only highlights the applicant's strengths, but also anticipates any potential questions or doubts the reviewer might have and addresses them head-on. It's about making it easy for the reviewer to understand the value the applicant brings. Now, a lot of these petitions, especially for the O-1s, EB-1As, and even some NIWs, they involve individuals with super technical backgrounds, right? Like scientists, engineers,
Yeah, the
innovators.
brainiacs.
Yeah, the real experts in their fields. And the article gives this really interesting example of why it's so important to make these technical achievements understandable, even to someone who's not a specialist in that field.
Right, because a USCIS officer isn't going to be an expert in quantum physics and artificial intelligence and bioengineering all at the same time. They need the information presented in a way that they can grasp the significance.
Exactly. And so they use this example. Instead of just saying that a client developed like a novel quantum entanglement algorithm, which I mean, I have no idea what that means.
Yeah, that's going right over my head, too.
They suggest explaining how that algorithm, okay, stay with me, how that algorithm enables significantly faster and more secure data transmission, which then, has huge implications for everything from like online banking to national security.
Right, that's way more impactful. You're taking this complex technical achievement and translating it into something that anyone can understand and appreciate the importance of.
Yeah, it's about connecting the dots, showing the real world impact, like who benefits from this? Why should we care?
It's about answering that so what question in a way that goes beyond the technical jargon and speaks to the bigger picture.
And the takeaway here, for you listening, is to always think about the impact and the significance of work, even if it seems really complex. How does it affect the real world? Who benefits? Framing those contributions in this way makes their importance clear to anyone.
It's about telling the story behind the science, behind the innovation.
Now, it's not just about explaining the client's achievements to the authorities, right? The article also talks about how important it is for attorneys to demystify the whole legal process for their clients as well.
Right, because let's be honest, going through the immigration process can be incredibly overwhelming and confusing.
Totally. So effective attorneys, they don't just bombard their clients with all this dense legal jargon. Instead, they break things down into, digestible pieces.
Like a legal translator, but for the client.
Yeah, exactly. They focus on what the client really needs to know. Like, what evidence is most important? Why do they meet the specific qualifications for that visa or green card? And how can they present their own information in a way that's going to be most effective?
It's about empowering the client to understand the process and be an active participant.
Exactly. And they actually give this perfect example in the article. Instead of throwing around all these phrases like, INA Section 203B2.
Oh, yeah, I heard that one. Makes my eyes glaze over every time.
Right. Or like per M labor certification, which just sounds like a bunch of gibberish to most people.
Total word salad.
Exactly. So instead of that, they suggest explaining things in plain English, like, hey, your work is having a real impact on the U.S. economy. And by showing this, we might be able to get you a green card even without a formal job offer.
Right. That's clear, concise, and directly relevant to the client's situation. It helps them understand the strategy and why certain things are important.
Exactly. It's not just about like spitting out legal terms. It's about explaining the meaning and the relevance to the client's case. It's about building that trust and reducing anxiety, right?
And that trust is huge because it allows the client to feel more comfortable sharing information and contributing to their case. They become a partner in the process rather than just a passive bystander.
Now, I know the article is mainly for attorneys, right?
Right.
So it also dives into some strategies that they can use in their practice. But even these insights, I think, can give us some clues into what makes a strong case, even if we're not lawyers ourselves.
Absolutely. I mean, understanding how the experts approach these cases can give us valuable insights into the process.
So, for example, they talk about how attorneys can benefit from outsourcing, like those routine tasks, things that can be handled by someone else, to free up their time to focus on the bigger picture.
Right, like the high-level strategy in developing that compelling narrative we talked about. It makes sense. You don't want to get bogged down in the minutia when you need to be focusing on the overall direction of the case.
Exactly. And it also mentions how attorneys should consider seeking expert immigration legal support, like from paralegals or other specialists, especially for those parts of the process that involve like a ton of documentation.
Which, let's face it, is a lot of immigration cases.
Yeah, right. I mean, think about all those forms and affidavits and supporting documents. It can get really intense.
And so, this emphasis on having expert help for the documentation side of things tells me that while the big picture, the narrative is crucial, the details matter too. Having all your ducks in a row, making sure the paperwork is precise and complete, that's still really important.
Right. It's like having a beautiful, well-designed car. But if the engine's not working properly, you're not going anywhere. You need both the style and the substance.
You need both the what and the how. The persuasive narrative explains what the applicant brings to the table, and the meticulous documentation proves it.
Exactly. It's a two-pronged approach. You need that strong, convincing story, and then you need that solid foundation of evidence and paperwork to back it up. It's about attention to detail, both on the big picture and the nitty-gritty details.
And those are the things that ultimately help build a stronger, more persuasive case for the applicant.
So if we're trying to sum all of this up, it seems like building a winning immigration case, especially for these more complex categories, really comes down to a few key things.
Yeah, what are those key ingredients?
Well, first, you need that clear communication. You got to be able to explain complex things in a way that everyone can understand, right? From the client to the immigration officer.
All right, clear communication is essential.
And then you got to have that compelling story, right? A narrative that really shows the impact of the applicant's work, why they're exceptional, or how their work benefits the nation. It's about painting that picture, highlighting the significance of their contributions.
The story brings the case to life, makes it memorable.
And finally, you got to be able to simplify those complex ideas. You got to break it down so that anyone, regardless of their background, can understand the value that's being presented.
It's about making the complex comprehensible, the technical relatable.
Exactly. And I think, even though we've been talking about immigration law specifically, these principles can apply to so many other areas of life. I mean, how often do we find ourselves trying to persuade someone or explain a complex idea?
All the time. Think about it. Giving a presentation at work, pitching a new business idea, even just having a debate with friends or family. Being able to communicate clearly, tell a compelling story, and simplify complex information, those skills are valuable in so many different contexts.
Totally. So as you're listening to this, I want you to think about how these strategies might apply to your own life.
Right. What can you take away from this deep dive into immigration law that could help you be more persuasive, more effective in your own communication?
What can you learn from the way these attorneys build their cases, how they tell those stories, how they highlight impact that you can then apply in your own personal and professional life?
That's the real question, isn't it? It's about taking these insights and making them work for you.
Food for thought, right? All right, well, that's going to wrap up our deep dive for today. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Until then.